perceive and to feel what you want them to feel. Almost nobody goes there. And I think the story of the writer's strike will prove instructive here. I was called about 3 years ago by Ari Emanuel, who's the leading agent in Hollywood, the role model for Entourage, and the brother of Rahm, who was the White House Chief of Staff, to help them with the writer's strike. The writers have been on strike for 3 months. They've been without a contract for a year, no new TV material, nobody was talking to anybody. They had finally scheduled a breakfast with the studio reps for that Thursday morning. It was a Tuesday afternoon. So I got on the phone with the Writers Guild people and a bunch of other people, and they wanted to know what the priority of the substantive issues are, what the royalty rate should be, and other contractual issues. And I said, forget all that stuff. Go to the breakfast and ask the people from the studios 3 questions. Question number 1, are you happy? We're not happy. Question number 2, are you making money? We're not making any money. Question number 3, if you had to do this over again, how would you guys do it? It took 30 minutes to restart the negotiations. It took 2 days to get an agreement. Now, there's 2 things I can say for sure about this. 1, it's not rocket science. And 2, unless you already know how to do it, it's completely invisible. And so that's what we're talking about, is learning this stuff that's invisible to the other party. Things like, are my actions meeting my goals? Of course they have problems in the Middle East because the wrong people are negotiating, people that are emotional. You know, they already have peace in the Middle East. 600,000 Palestinians and Israelis live together. They should be negotiating. And so those are the kinds of things that come up. This is the model based upon a lot of research that supports what I've been talking about, and this has particular relevance to Googlers. And when I mention this, it would take some getting used to, because it's very different from probably the model that you've seen in your own heads in terms of Google's success. Less than 10% of the reason why people reach agreements has anything to do with the facts and the substance. Has almost nothing to do with how good your engineering is, with the substantive knowledge you have. More than 50% has to do with whether the people like you or not, and another almost 40% has to do with what process you use. Do you deal with emotions? Do you get commitments, etc.? And if you think this is this top blue triangle is the negotiation, sadly, you're going to be right more than you're persuasive. This is very hard for people who are substantively based to grasp, but it's absolutely true based upon a ton of research. Why was O.J. Simpson found not guilty by the first jury in Los Angeles, despite a yard of DNA evidence, including his blood at the site? It's because the jury, the inner city jury, didn't like or trust the prosecutor, and if they don't like you and they don't trust you, they won't hear you. Now, Google has been wildly successful because of this blue triangle up here, that you're so far ahead of the pack that you've done great. I read this book, this treatise in business school called The Myth of U.S. Industrial Supremacy, and there's a line in there that stuck with me. It said, there is no human enterprise, organization, or civilization that cannot, given enough time, be ruined. And so what I'm thinking about is it's fantastic, but it doesn't last forever. That additional skills are needed. I gave a presentation at Microsoft about 4 or 5 years ago to the business development and legal department. And the first thing I did was that I told the 300 people there that I had Googled Microsoft and that I had typed in 3 words, Europe hates Microsoft. And I said, why did I get 5 million hits in a tenth of a second? I said, you think that cost you money? You think the fact that people don't like you means they won't buy your products, even if it's the best on the market for their application. And so this is something that one needs to pay a lot of attention to, which means that the characteristics and sensibilities of the person sitting across from you so dwarfs every other part of the negotiation, it's not even worth talking about race, religion, gender, culture, creed, unless you know who's sitting across from you. If you bring 3 people to a negotiation on Monday, and so do they, and you bring a 4th person on Tuesday, it's a completely different negotiation. Even with the same 6 people, somebody's kid might be sick, somebody have had a bad commute. So the first thing I've got to do is take the emotional temperature of the person sitting across from me, even if, and perhaps especially if, I'm married to them. There is no Google way to negotiate. There is no American way to negotiate. There are just individuals and the pictures in their heads. I've had the opportunity to read the titles of all 2,200 negotiation books written since 1950, as well as 400 or 500 books themselves, and I found some doozies. Here's one of my favorite. How to Negotiate with the Japanese. Well, what's wrong with that? What? You're negotiating with 130 million Japanese? How interesting. You're negotiating with a person or a couple of people who may be more or less the same as the cultural norm. So I want to figure out what are the pictures in their heads. A more dramatic example, if you were a Jew in Poland in 1944 and you thought the Nazis were monolithic and you met Oskar Schindler, you lost your life. Because you didn't realize that Schindler, although a Nazi, was willing to save your life, but you never asked him because you thought all Nazis hated Jews. What a source of competitive advantage it is to know who's really the same and who's really different. And so that is a tremendous competitive advantage for you. You may have more in common with somebody who is your sworn arch enemy than you do with somebody who sits next to you at Google if you just took the time to find out. Once you do that, you then have to figure out whether your perceptions match. And if they don't, what do you do about it? And I put this up in my classroom when I teach. And I point to the red dot and I say to people, okay, what do you see? 2 words or less, and I get these answers and hundreds more. I get vast disagreement about what people saw from a simple picture. Only less than half of the answers contain the word red in it. And in addition to that, most people process a small amount of the available information. Clearly there's more white space than red dot. And so what you think is the perception doesn't mean that they think it's the perception. And for example, we did a role reversal, and this is in the book at Google. With one of the attorneys, I had him play a salesperson. He played a salesperson for 5 minutes, and he said, you know, I was amazed after 5 minutes at how much I hated lawyers at Google. And so because there are different perceptions that you have to find out based upon different ways that people have been brought up, on influences on them, and you need to find out. So every time you have a disagreement with somebody, you need to check your perceptions and theirs. This is even a much more serious problem than that. I'm sure you've all seen this picture. I'm not going to go through the details of it for time, but if you want to ask me after you can, there are 2 women in this picture, a young woman to the left of the picture and an old woman, which is sort of the whole picture. One's mouth is the other's necklace, one nose is the other's chin, and so forth. I've given half of this picture to a class, the young woman, and the old woman to the other half of the class, and I've asked them to stare at their half for 5 minutes while I took this off the screen. Then I put the combined picture back on the screen. What do you think happened? Well, almost nobody could see the other one. So the question is If people have trouble seeing an image they know is there after seeing a contrary image for 5 minutes, how much trouble does one culture have seeing another culture's point of view that has seen the same picture for 1,000 years? And when I say culture, I mean production versus marketing, legal versus sales, Mets versus Phillies. I don't just mean Arabs and Jews. Okay, so this issue is much more serious. They're not being stubborn. They're not being recalcitrant. They're not being stupid. What you see so clearly is not there for them at all. It doesn't exist. And so you've got to start at the beginning. What are the pictures in their heads? And what I think is black, they may think is white. And you've got to find out, friend or foe, or you don't have a prayer to persuade them willingly, only by force.